just tell us why you think they should. What's the argument for closure?
Well, the secondary schools are the second highest place where you like to catch COVID, and primary schools the third highest place. And in London, the week before last, there were 38 outbreaks in secondary schools. Last week, there were 280 outbreaks. In primary, there were 19 the week before, and last week, there were 190. So unfortunately, schools are places where children are spreading COVID. Now, they aren't likely to get it badly. Most of them will be asymptomatic. But that's the problem. Because what they do is they take the virus, unfortunately, into their families. So if you look at the data, the third largest group now to be catching COVID, is the 34 to 45-year-olds, who are the parents of these secondary and primary age pupils. So, schools are acting as vectors for COVID. That's the first reason why they should close now. And secondly, frankly, I had a phone call today from a school leader who this morning has 20 staff isolating and 15 support staff. And frankly, in many schools now, the staffing levels are so low that school leaders are really worried that they are not providing a safe working environment for pupils and for teachers. So it makes perfect sense to close now and actually get the government now really to start implementing the safety measures which would allow schools to be much more COVID secure, because they have not done that effectively.
Let me I'll ask you about those extra safety measures in a moment. The consequences of closing schools is or one of the arguments against it is, well, first, there is the relatively small risk to young people and children from COVID. And secondly, the knock-on effects of that. What the childcare arrangements that parents would have to put in place will then impact on the economy, because one or other parent is going to have to take time off work.
Well, so I think I've dealt with the first one. We're not arguing that some children very unfortunately really get ill, but they're a very, very tiny minority. They get this, Kawasaki syndrome, but that is very, very minor. So you're quite right. The vast majority of children will be asymptomatic. They will not know they've got the virus. That is not the reason why we're arguing that schools should be closed this week. We're arguing that schools should be closed this week because they are very able, particularly secondary age pupils, and particularly after puberty, to pass the virus on. And if they catch COVID and pass it on, particularly as we've got the relaxation of restrictions over Christmas, then the consequences in January and February could be really very serious. And secondly, about parents, at the moment, it's just chaos out there. We've got pupils isolating, going back to school for a few days. Because schools are not COVID secure, they're having to isolate again. And parents are having a completely unregulated, they don't know when their child is going to isolate. They don't know when they're going to have to take time off work. I was talking to a parent today whose child is in primary school. This is his third period of isolation because he's been in contact with another child who has COVID. So that is just impossible for parents at the moment. What we have to do is reset the clock, get the safety measures in place, and then make schools more secure and more COVID safe so that we don't have this unregulated last-minute absences of so many people who have to isolate at home.
Let me ask you about this insecurity as you see it. In what ways have schools not become COVID secure?
Well, it was always going to be a very difficult task, wasn't it? In secondary schools in particular, when the government said that you could have year group bubbles of up to 240 pupils, because some schools have 240 in a year group, it was always going to be a big ask. Once we knew that secondary school pupils can transmit the virus as well as adults, that if they're in a building with no social distancing, with poor ventilation, with inadequate toilet and cleaning facilities, and schools getting, until last week, no extra money for cleaning, no extra money for staffing, it was always going to be a really big ask to say somehow COVID would not spread in schools because they were named schools. And that has been something we have taken up with the government repeatedly. We wrote to the government on the 10th of June and said, if you're going to reopen schools safely, you need to do the following things. You need to increase the school size. You need to have very small year group bubbles. They need to have limited action with a limited interaction with a limited number of teachers. You've got to increase the cleaning budget, and you've got to get your test, track, trace and isolate working. None of those things have happened. So it's no surprise to me that despite the huge efforts, absolutely huge efforts of leaders and teachers and support staff, schools are not COVID secure. They have not been given the funds, nor they've been given the resources to enable them to be so. And that has been shown in the level of outbreaks in school. Look at the numbers in London.
Just to be absolutely clear then, would you recommend to the Secretary of State that he orders all secondary schools to close at the close of business today at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock today?
No, I would say to the Secretary of State, because schools are in very different circumstances in different parts of the country, I would say leave it to school leaders who know how many staff they've got in, know what the infection rates are in their school, know what level of pupil absence there are in their school, to make those professional decisions and stop threatening leaders who are under desperate circumstances with prosecution under COVID legislation if they make the professional decision based on their evidence and their school to close.
Mary Bousted, Dr. Mary Bousted from the NEU, thank you very much indeed for being our guest today.